The emergency alarm screamed through the crystalline halls of the Galactic Council's headquarters, a sound that hadn't been heard in over 3 centuries. Ambassador Zixithra's 6 eyes dilated in terror as she watched the massive holographic display flicker and die. One by one, every single human communication node across the galaxy went dark. "This cannot be happening," whispered Council Leader Mordan, his tentacles trembling as they gripped the edges of his floating command chair. The ancient being had lived for nearly 2,000 years, had witnessed wars between entire star systems, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. The display showed it all in horrifying clarity. Every human embassy, every trade station, every diplomatic outpost, silent. In less than 30 minutes, humanity had vanished from galactic communications entirely. No warnings, no explanations, just silence. "Sir," stammered Communications Officer Telek, her crystalline voice cracking with disbelief. "The humans have recalled every single ambassador, withdrawn from all treaties, and—" She paused, her translator struggling with the magnitude of what she was about to say. "They've activated something called Protocol Omega." The chamber fell into a silence so complete that the only sound was the gentle hum of the station's life support systems. Morden's ancient hearts beat in rhythm like war drums. Protocol Omega. Even he, with all his centuries of diplomatic experience, had never heard that term before. "Get me the human sector immediately," he commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never been denied. "Open every channel we have." Tilek's fingers danced across her console with desperate precision. Lights flickered, systems strained, but the result was always the same. Static. Dead air. Nothing. "Sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not just that they're not responding, it's like they never existed at all. Every human frequency, every quantum communication link, every subspace relay, they're all broadcasting the same message." "What message?" Mordan demanded. The main screen flickered to life, showing a simple text display in dozens of galactic languages. The message was brief, cold, and absolutely terrifying. "Diplomatic relations terminated. Do not approach human space. This is your only warning." Ambassador Zixithra's primary breathing apparatus fluttered nervously. "In all my years of xenodiplomacy," she said, "I've never seen anything like this. Humans don't do this. They talk everything to death. They form committees to form committees. They just declared war on the entire galaxy without firing a single shot," interrupted General Korthax, his forearms crossing in a gesture that every species recognized as deeply troubled. The battle-scarred warrior had fought beside humans in the Andromedan conflict. He knew their capabilities better than most. "War?" Morden's voice carried a note of disbelief. "The humans have been our most peaceful members for over 50 years. Ambassador Sarah Chen just last week proposed expanding the cultural exchange program. Her own daughter is attending the academy on Zentari Prime. Why would they—" The lights suddenly dimmed throughout the station. Emergency power kicked in, bathing everything in an ominous red glow. Tilek's console erupted in warning signals. "Sir?" she called out, her voice tight with fear. "We're detecting massive energy signatures throughout human space. Whatever they're doing, it's affecting space-time itself." On the main display, real-time feeds from observation posts scattered throughout the galaxy began showing the same impossible sight. The borders of human space, once invisible lines on political maps, were now marked by walls of shimmering energy that stretched across entire star systems. The barriers pulsed with colors that hurt to look at directly, and ships that ventured too close simply stopped. Not destroyed, not damaged, just frozen in space as if time itself had become solid. "By the Ancient Ones," breathed Mordan. "They're isolating themselves from the entire galaxy." But the most terrifying part wasn't the barriers themselves. It was what they represented. Humanity, a species that had joined the galactic community barely 2 centuries ago, was demonstrating technology that made the Council's most advanced civilizations look like children playing with toys. How? whispered Zixthra. How is this possible? Our intelligence reports showed humans were still working on basic faster-than-light communications. They needed our help with quantum physics just last year. General Korthak stepped forward, his scarred face grim. Maybe, he said slowly. They didn't need our help as much as we thought. The emergency alarm continued to wail, but now it seemed almost mocking. The Galactic Council, an organization that had kept peace between thousands of species for millennia, had just lost its most seemingly harmless member, and in doing so, had discovered they might never have known that member at all. As if responding to their growing panic, every screen in the command center suddenly displayed the same image, the familiar blue marble of Earth, humanity's homeworld. But something was different. The planet was surrounded by structures that definitely hadn't been there yesterday, massive orbital platforms that dwarfed even the largest council ships. When did they build those? Telek asked, her voice cracking. More importantly, Morden said, his tentacles now completely still with dread. What else have they been building while we weren't looking? The answer to that question they were beginning to realize might determine the fate of the entire galaxy. Chapter 2. The Truth Behind Human Smiles. 3 hours after the communications blackout began, Emergency Session 7749 of the Galactic Council was called to order. The great amphitheater, designed to accommodate representatives from over 3,000 species, had never felt so small. Every seat was filled, every eye focused on the central podium where Council Leader Morden stood like a statue carved from ancient stone. Fellow beings, he began, his voice carrying across the chamber through quantum translators. We face an unprecedented crisis. For the first time in Council history, a member species has unilaterally withdrawn from all galactic accords without explanation or negotiation. A wave of concerned murmurs rippled through the assembled delegates. The Vorthak delegation, massive insectoid beings who communicated through clicking sounds, created a rhythm that sounded almost like nervous laughter. The crystalline Zephyrians rang like wind chimes in distress. Ambassador Quindar of the Nexus Federation rose from his seat, his blue-scaled form catching the chamber's light. With respect, Council Leader, perhaps we should examine why humanity would take such drastic action. In my experience, no species abandons diplomatic ties without significant provocation. Provocation? The voice came from the upper galleries where General Tissera of the Andromedans perched. Her species had fought alongside humans in 3 major conflicts. The humans have been treated as honored members for decades. They've received technology transfers, cultural exchanges, protected trade routes. What provocation could possibly justify this madness? Dr. Veltar, the Council's chief xenopsychologist, activated his hover platform and glided to the speaking area. His species, the Emtari, had been studying human behavior longer than most. If I may, he said, his mental voice touching every mind in the chamber, I believe we may have fundamentally misunderstood humanity from the beginning. The chamber fell silent. Veltar's reputation for accuracy in species analysis was legendary. 3 months ago, he continued, my department completed a comprehensive review of all human interactions since their admission to the Council. The results were disturbing. In every negotiation, every trade agreement, every military cooperation, humans consistently achieved outcomes that exceeded what should have been possible given their apparent technological and political limitations. He gestured, and holographic displays appeared throughout the chamber. Take the Kepler mining rights dispute. Humans negotiated extraction rights to 17 systems that we believed contained only low-grade minerals. Our geological surveys confirmed this. Yet somehow those same systems now produce 70% of the rare earth elements that power our most advanced technologies. Worried chittering erupted from the insectoid delegates. These minerals were critical to galactic civilization. Or consider the Battle of Proxima Gate, Veltar continued. Human forces arrived with what our military experts deemed adequate but unremarkable weapons technology. Yet they single-handedly turned the tide against the Void Hunters using tactics and equipment that our best strategists couldn't explain then, and still can't explain now. General Korthak stood up, his forearms spreading wide. You're suggesting the humans have been lying to us for 50 years? Not lying, Veltar corrected. Misdirecting. There's a human phrase, speak softly and carry a big stick. I believe we've been listening to their soft words while completely failing to notice the size of their stick. The chamber erupted in chaos. Delegates from dozens of species began talking at once, their translators creating a cacophony of overlapping voices. Some demanded military action, others called for investigation. A few suggested that perhaps humanity's isolation was for the best. Through it all, Ambassador Zixthra sat in stunned silence, her 6 eyes fixed on a small datapad in her lap. As head of the Cultural Exchange Program, she had worked more closely with humans than almost anyone in the chamber. Now, memories she had dismissed as curious quirks began taking on sinister new meanings. She remembered Ambassador Chen's daughter, Lisa, supposedly a teenager attending the academy on Zentari Prime. But Zixthra had personally reviewed the girl's academic records. Lisa was completing advanced courses in quantum mechanics and stellar engineering that even graduate students from the most advanced species struggled with. When questioned, Chen had simply smiled and said, "She's always been gifted in mathematics." Then, there was the Human Research Station on Kepler 442c. Officially, it was studying atmospheric compositions of gas giants, but Zixthra had noticed that the station's power consumption patterns were inconsistent with atmospheric research. They matched the energy signatures of weapons development facilities, and the human diplomatic pouches, sealed containers that traveled between human embassies under diplomatic immunity. Standard protocol limited their size to prevent smuggling, but human pouches were always exactly at the maximum allowable dimensions. Every single one. In 50 years of diplomatic service, that level of consistency was impossible unless they've been coordinating everything, she whispered to herself. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Every human diplomat, every cultural exchange student, every trade negotiator, they had all been working together as parts of a single, incredibly sophisticated intelligence operation. And the Galactic Council had helped them do it. She activated her personal communicator and began accessing files that suddenly seemed far more significant. Trade routes that humans had specifically requested, routes that now formed a perfect supply network spanning the galaxy. Research partnerships that had given humans access to technology from every major civilization. Cultural exchanges that had placed human students in sensitive positions across known space. By the Ancient Ones, she breathed. They've been preparing for this for decades. At the podium, Morden was calling for order, but the chamber had descended into near panic. Reports were coming in from across the galaxy. Human research stations were revealing themselves to be massive military installations. Human trading posts were deploying defensive systems that made Council starships look like toys. Human cultural centers were coordinating evacuations of human civilians from non-human worlds with military precision. The question, General Korthak's voice cut through the chaos, is what are they preparing for? What could possibly require humanity to cut ties with the entire galactic community? His answer came in the form of an emergency communication from the Rim territories. The message was brief, urgent, and absolutely terrifying. Unknown vessels approaching from extragalactic space. Massive formations, not responding to hails. Estimated arrival at outer colonies, 14 standard hours. The chamber fell into absolute silence. After a long moment, Dr. Veltar's mental voice touched every mind present. Perhaps humanity wasn't preparing to fight us. Perhaps they were preparing to protect us. But even as that possibility offered a glimmer of hope, another thought struck the assembled delegates. If humanity had been hiding their true capabilities for 50 years, if they had been planning this moment for decades, what else didn't the galaxy know about its human neighbors? And more importantly, was it already too late to find out? Chapter 3. What humans really are, the edge of known space had always been quiet. That's what made the Arcturus monitoring station the perfect place for young officers to cut their teeth on deep space surveillance. Junior technician Yilmoth of the Cetacean Collective had drawn the night shift, expecting nothing more exciting than cataloging asteroid movements and cosmic radiation patterns. He definitely hadn't expected to witness what might be the end of galactic civilization. "Senior Officer Trenak," he called, his voice tight with disbelief. "You need to see this, right now." Trenak, a grizzled veteran of Border Patrol duty, glided over to Yilmoth's station with the unhurried pace of someone who had seen everything the galaxy could throw at him. That confidence evaporated the moment he saw the sensor readings. "That can't be right," he whispered. "Run a full diagnostic. Check for system errors, cosmic interference, anything." "Already did, sir. 3 times." Yilmoth's tentacles trembled as they manipulated the controls. "The readings are accurate. There are over 10,000 ships approaching from extragalactic space. Their energy signatures are... Sir, they're unlike anything in our databases." The main display showed what their sensors had detected. A wall of vessels stretched across, hundreds of light years moving in perfect formation toward galactic space. The ships themselves defied easy description. Organic-looking curves mixed with geometric patterns that hurt to look at, as if they existed in more dimensions than the mind could properly process. "Get me command," Trenak ordered. "Priority, Alpha, and prepare the emergency beacon." But before Yilmoth could comply, something impossible happened. Space itself began to shift. The stars in front of the approaching fleet started to bend and twist as if reality was being folded, like paper. And through that fold in space-time, a single human vessel appeared. It was larger than any ship in the Council's fleet. Its hull a seamless blend of familiar human design elements and technology that looked like it belonged in the far future. As Yilmoth and Trenak watched in stunned silence, hundreds more human ships began emerging from what could only be described as artificially created wormholes. "Sir," Yilmoth said, his voice barely functioning, "the human ships, they're taking defensive positions between the unknown fleet and galactic space." On the display, the tactical situation became clear with terrifying precision. The human fleet, and it was definitely a fleet, not the small exploration vessels the galaxy was used to seeing, had arranged itself in a complex 3-dimensional formation that showed intimate knowledge of advanced military strategy. They weren't just blocking the approaching threat, they were demonstrating that they had been expecting it. "Open a channel," Trenak commanded. "All frequencies." The response came immediately, but not from the approaching alien fleet. It was a human voice, speaking in perfect galactic common with the crisp professionalism of a military officer. "Arcturus Station, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Human Defense Fleet. You are ordered to withdraw to a safe distance immediately. Long range. Evacuation ships are en route to your position." Trenak blinked in confusion. "Admiral, but Sarah Chen is our cultural attaché on Centauri Prime. She organizes art exchanges and poetry readings." The voice responded with what sounded almost like amusement. "Senior Officer Trenak, I believe you'll find that humans are significantly more complex than your files suggest. You have approximately 6 minutes to begin evacuation procedures before this sector becomes a combat zone." "Combat zone?" Yilmoth squeaked. "Admiral Chen, what are those ships? Who are they?" The pause that followed seemed to stretch for eternity. When Chen's voice returned, it carried a weight that made both officers' blood run cold. "They're called the Devourers. We've been fighting them for over 200 years. The implications of that statement hit like a physical blow. 200 years. That meant humans had been engaged in an intergalactic war since before they'd even made contact with the Galactic Council. Every cultural exchange, every trade agreement, every diplomatic mission, all of it had been conducted while humanity fought for survival against an enemy the rest of the galaxy never knew existed. "But how?" Trenak asked. "How is that possible?" "Our deep space sensors, our monitoring networks, have been carefully managed," Chen replied. "We've been fighting this war in dimensional space, in parallel realities, in temporal loops, anywhere except the primary timeline where galactic civilization exists, until now." As if summoned by her words, the approaching alien fleet began to change. The organic-looking ship started to unfold. Sections of their hulls peeled back like flower petals, revealing weapons that pulsed with energy that made space itself ripple. And from within each vessel, smaller ships began emerging, not launching, like normal fighters, but being birthed like living creatures. By the Ancient Ones, Trenak breathed. They're alive. Partially, Chen confirmed. The Devourers are a hybrid of biological and technological evolution, taken to its ultimate conclusion. They consume entire realities, leaving nothing but empty space behind. We're the only species they've encountered that can fight them effectively. Why? Yilmoth asked. What makes humans special? Another pause. We're not special. We're desperate, and desperate beings will do things that sane ones won't even consider. On the display, the human fleet began to move. Ships that had seemed large now revealed themselves to be massive. Some, easily the size of small moons. They moved with impossible grace, their formations shifting in three-dimensional patterns that spoke of decades of practice against this specific enemy. Weapon systems came online, and space around the human ships began to glow with energies that the monitoring station's sensors couldn't even classify. Admiral, Trenak said, his voice filled with newfound respect and terror. Why didn't you? Tell us. The Council could have helped. Combined fleets, shared technology. Could you? Chen's voice carried a note of sad certainty. Senior officer, in the time it takes your species to form a committee to discuss forming a committee, we've had to develop weapons that can kill gods and strategies that require us to sacrifice entire star systems. The galactic community is built on cooperation and consensus. War against the Devourers requires choices that no civilized society should ever have to make. As if to emphasize her point, something extraordinary happened. One of the massive human ships simply changed. Its hull began to shift and flow like liquid metal, parts of it folding into configurations that looked almost organic. Within moments, what had been a starship became something that resembled a mechanical dragon the size of a small planet. What we're about to do, Chen continued, will probably horrify you. We're going to show these creatures that humans learned something from 2 centuries of war that they never expected. We learned how to become monsters, when monsters are what the situation requires. The transformed ship, creature, opened what might have been a mouth, and space itself began to scream. Evacuation ships are now in range of your station, Chen said, her voice maintaining its professional calm even as reality bent around the human fleet. I strongly suggest you take this opportunity to leave. What happens next isn't going to be safe for organic minds to witness. Trenak and Yilmoth found themselves moving toward the evacuation pods without conscious decision. Behind them, the monitoring station's sensors began registering energy readings that threatened to overload every system on board. As their evacuation pod pulled away from the station, Yilmoth looked back at the tactical display one last time. The human fleet had completed its transformation. Ships had become creatures, weapons had become organs, and the entire formation now resembled something that belonged in nightmares rather than space. And facing them, the Devourer fleet was preparing to discover that after 200 years of war, humanity had learned to be something far more terrifying than anything that crawled out of the space between galaxies. The last thing Yilmoth heard before their communications cut out was Admiral Chen's voice, no longer speaking to them but to her fleet. All units, this is Admiral Chen. Protocol Omega is now in effect. Show them what we really are. Warnaz Chapter 4. The galaxy's new reality. In the emergency bunkers beneath the Galactic Council headquarters, the assembled leadership of known civilization watched in stunned silence as humanity revealed the truth about themselves. The main display showed feeds from across the galaxy, automated monitoring stations, deep space probes, and the few brave souls who had chosen to witness history rather than flee to safety. Council leader Mordan had lived for nearly 2 millennia, but in the past 6 hours he felt as though he had aged another 1,000 years. By the Ancient Ones, he whispered, watching human vessels transform into configurations that defied every law of physics he thought he understood. What have we been sharing our galaxy with? The battle, if it could be called that, was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. The Devourers, creatures that had apparently consumed entire realities in other dimensions, were being systematically dismantled by human forces that moved with the precision of a surgeon and the brutality of a natural disaster. Dr. Veltar, the xenopsychologist who had first suggested humanity wasn't what they appeared, floated near the main console in a state of near shock. The psychological profiles, he mumbled. Every analysis, every behavioral study, we interpreted their responses as peaceful, cooperative, conflict-averse. But we were measuring the wrong things. What do you mean? Ambassador Zixthra asked, though part of her already suspected the answer. We measured their willingness to compromise in trade negotiations and assumed they were weak. We observed their preference for diplomatic solutions and concluded they were pacifists. We noted their emotional responses to conflict and labeled them as overly sensitive. Veltar's mental voice carried waves of horrified understanding. We never realized that a species could be simultaneously compassionate and absolutely ruthless. They don't fight because they enjoy it. They fight because they're willing to do whatever is necessary to protect what they value. On the display, a human ship, one that had been disguised as a simple cargo vessel for over 30 years, was systematically tearing apart Devourer bioships that dwarfed entire Council fleets. The weapon systems it deployed weren't just advanced, they were conceptually different, operating on principles that seemed to treat the laws of physics as suggestions rather than absolutes. General Korthax, his forearms crossed in a gesture of deep unease, spoke what everyone was thinking. How long have they been capable of this? How long have they been managing us? The answer came from an unexpected source. The chamber's communication system activated, and Admiral Sarah Chen's voice filled the room. Gone was the cheerful cultural attaché who had organized poetry, readings, and art exhibitions. In her place was a military commander with the weight of centuries in her voice. Members of the Galactic Council, she began. I apologize for the deception, but it was necessary. My name is Admiral Sarah Chen, and I serve as the primary liaison between the Human Defense Coalition and what you call galactic civilization. Admiral, Morden said, finding his voice. We need to understand. The Devourers, how long have you been fighting them? 237 years, Chen replied without hesitation. They first encountered humanity when we began experimenting with dimensional fold technology. Unlike every other species they'd consumed, we didn't simply surrender or flee. We adapted. The main display shifted to show what appeared to be a human command center, but one that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Officers worked at stations that seemed to exist in several realities at once, coordinating strategies across what looked like infinite variations of space-time. The war couldn't be fought in normal space-time, Chen continued. The Devourers consume linear reality, so we learned to fight in dimensional space, temporal loops, quantum possibilities, anywhere except the primary timeline where galactic civilization exists. We've been protecting you for over 2 centuries, and you never knew we existed. Ambassador, Quindar of the Nexus Federation leaned forward. But why the deception? Why not ask for help? Chen's laugh was bitter and tired. Because help from the galactic community would have been like asking children to help fight nuclear war. Your species cooperate beautifully. You negotiate, compromise, seek consensus. But war against the Devourers requires decisions that would destroy your civilization's fundamental values. On the display, they could see the proof of her words. Human forces were using weapons that appeared to be converting entire sections of space-time into pure energy. Ships were sacrificing themselves in ways that would have been considered war crimes by galactic standards, their crews accepting death as a strategic necessity rather than a tragic loss. We've had to become something that the galactic community couldn't accept, Chen said. We've weaponized concepts that your philosophers consider sacred. We've industrialized warfare to a degree that would be considered obscene by any civilized standard. We've made choices that will haunt us for generations, if we survive long enough to have generations. Dr. Veltar spoke up, his mental voice carrying desperate curiosity. The cultural exchanges, the trade agreements, the diplomatic missions, what was their real purpose? Intelligence gathering, resource acquisition, strategic positioning. Chen's voice was matter-of-fact. Every human who interacted with galactic civilization was gathering information we needed to protect you. Your weaknesses, your capabilities, your responses to various stimuli. We needed to know what we were protecting and how to protect it. Protect it? General Korthax's voice carried a note of offense. We're not children who need protection. Aren't you? Chen asked quietly. General, your species has fought wars over territory and resources. The Devourers fight wars over the continued existence of reality itself. You negotiate ceasefires. They negotiate the fundamental structure of space-time. You consider genocide to be the ultimate horror. They consider it to be Tuesday. The brutality of that statement hit the chamber like a physical blow. On the display, the battle was reaching its conclusion. The Devourer fleet, despite its overwhelming size and obvious technological superiority, was being systematically destroyed by human forces that fought with a combination of advanced technology and strategic ruthlessness that defied comprehension. The isolation, Mordan said, understanding beginning to dawn. You're not abandoning us, you're protecting us from what you've become. Partly, Chen admitted, but also protecting ourselves from you. Admiral, the war is ending. The Devourers have been defeated in this sector, but they exist across multiple dimensions and timelines. We estimate another 50 to 70 years of conflict before they're completely eliminated. And after that? Zixthra asked. There was a long pause. After that, we'll have to decide whether the beings we've become in order to win this war are compatible with galactic civilization. We've done things, made choices, developed capabilities that might make us more dangerous to you than the Devourers ever were. But you saved us. Yilmoth's voice came through the communication system. Apparently the young technician was listening from his evacuation ship. Yes, Chen said simply. And that's the only thing that gives us hope that we might still be human when this is over. The display showed the last of the Devourer ships being consumed by weapons that turned matter into pure concept and then deleted the concept from reality. Space began to return to normal, but the scars of the battle, areas where the fundamental laws of physics had been temporarily rewritten, would probably remain visible for millennia. Council Leader Mordan, Chen said, humanity formally requests reinstatement to the Galactic Council once our current conflict is resolved. We'll submit to any evaluation, any restriction, any oversight you deem necessary. But we wanted you to know who we really are before we ask to come home. Morden looked around the chamber at faces representing thousands of species, each trying to process what they had learned. Finally, he spoke. Admiral Chen, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I want to say, thank you, and when you're ready to come home, we'll be here. Thank you, Council Leader. It's been an honor protecting you, even if you didn't know we were doing it. Chen out. The communication ended, leaving the chamber in silence broken only by the gentle hum of life support systems. After a long moment, Dr. Veltar's mental voice touched every mind present. I believe we need to completely revise our understanding of what makes a species civilized. Outside, in the depths of space, the last traces of the battle faded away. But the knowledge that humanity, gentle, diplomatic, art-loving humanity, was capable of becoming something that could fight gods and win, would forever change how the galaxy saw itself and its place in the universe. The age of innocence was over. The age of understanding was just beginning. Epilogue. 50 years later, the Terran Memorial Garden on Galactic Council Station was always peaceful at this time of cycle. Ambassador Zixthra, now considerably older, but still serving as head of the Cultural Exchange Program, made her daily visit to the monument that stood at its center. A simple black wall inscribed with names in every language known to galactic civilization. These were the beings who had died, not knowing that humanity was fighting for their survival. Scientists whose research had been coincidentally guided toward developments that helped the war effort. Diplomats whose negotiations had unknowingly established supply lines for human forces. artists whose cultural works had been used to understand alien psychology for strategic purposes. "I still come here too," a familiar voice said behind her. Zixthra turned to see Admiral Sarah Chen, though she went by Dr. Chen now, having returned to her original profession as a xenoanthropologist after the war's end. The years had been kind to her, though her eyes still carried the weight of choices no being should have to make. 50 years, Zixthra said, gesturing at the memorial. "Do you think they would have understood?" Chen was quiet for a long moment, studying the names on the wall. Some would have. Others would have been horrified. Most would have tried to find a third option, because that's what civilized beings do. She smiled slightly. "That's why we loved you all enough to become monsters, to protect you." The garden around them was a testament to the new relationship between humanity and the galactic community. Plants from Earth grew alongside flora from thousands of worlds, creating combinations that shouldn't have been possible, but somehow thrived together. It was, Zixthra thought, a perfect metaphor for what they had all become. "The young ones don't believe the stories," she said. "They think the war accounts are exaggerated. They can't imagine gentle Professor Chen from the Academy once commanded fleets that could rewrite the laws of physics." "Good," Chen said firmly. "I hope they never have to understand what we became." That was the whole point. A group of students walked past, a mixed class from various species studying at the Council Academy. Among them, Zixthra noticed, were several young humans who were indistinguishable from their alien classmates in their enthusiasm for art, literature, and peaceful cooperation. The integration had been more successful than anyone had dared hope. "Do you ever regret it?" Zixthra asked. "The deception, the isolation, the things you had to do?" Chen considered the question seriously. "I regret the necessity of it. I regret that we had to make those choices, but regret the choices themselves?" She shook her head. "Never. We saved over 14 trillion beings across 3,000 species. The mathematics of morality are pretty clear on that one. And if the devourers return, they won't," Chen said with quiet certainty. "We made sure of that. But if something like them ever appears again..." She looked at the mixed group of students, now sitting together in a circle, sharing stories and laughter. "Well, the galaxy won't have to face it alone this time." As they watched, one of the human students began telling what was obviously a joke, causing the entire group to erupt in laughter, clicks and chimes and musical tones blending together in a symphony of genuine friendship. It was a sound that Chen had fought 2 centuries to preserve. "You know," Zixthra said, "I think I finally understand the real reason you isolated yourselves at the end." "Oh? You weren't protecting us from what you'd become. You were protecting what you'd become from us. You were afraid that if we saw you as the warriors you'd been forced to be, we might ask you to stay that way." Chen's smile was sad but proud. "The Galactic Council produces some very insightful xenodiplomats." They stood in comfortable silence, watching as the garden's automated systems began the evening illumination cycle. Soft lights came on throughout the space, highlighting the memorial wall while leaving the rest of the garden in peaceful twilight. "There's something I've always wondered," Zixthra said. "That first day when you withdrew from all diplomatic ties, did you know we'd welcome you back?" Chen laughed, and for a moment she sounded like the cultural attaché who had organized poetry readings and art exhibitions. "Ambassador, after 50 years of studying galactic civilization, there was one thing we were absolutely certain of. You're all much too polite to hold a grudge forever." As the stars began to appear in the station's viewing dome overhead, the 2 friends continued their quiet conversation in the garden, dedicated to remembering those who had died in a war they never knew was being fought. Around them, the Galactic Council station hummed with the peaceful activity of a civilization that was free to pursue art, science, and philosophy, because somewhere in the darkness, warriors had been willing to become monsters so that their children wouldn't have to. It was, they both agreed, not a perfect solution to the moral complexities of existence, but it was a human one. The end.